Jack, super excited to have you on. We're going to talk a little hydrogen today, which is out of the normal for us. Our podcast focuses on CO2, but as there are advancements made in clean energy, we hear a lot about hydrogen production being a new source and kind of the ramifications that come along with it, along with those positives. One of them being the CO2 produced, and we find ourselves here having a conversation that actually impacts the CO2 market.
Yes.
But the primary driver is that hydrogen. So Jack, we're excited to have you on today. Jack is the Vice President of Project Development with Bayotech. And Jack, thank you for coming. Why don't you give us an intro, a little bit about Bayotech, and then for our audience, really the first time we're going to dive into hydrogen. Set the stage.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. It's an exciting time in the hydrogen industry, and I think in the CO2 business as well. Bayotech is we've been around for a while. It's a well-known brand in the hydrogen space, in the gas space. We've got several nodes of business. I lead the development of hydrogen production hubs for Bayotech, and we have a patented licensed SMR technology that we're commercializing that comes out of the U.S. National Labs. So that's where we're working together on CO2. We also though build and sell and distribute hydrogen transportation and storage equipment. We have a factory in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we build gaseous storage transportation equipment and gaseous storage pods there for the hydrogen industry. And we've sold quite a bit of that over the last few years. So I think what's most germane to this discussion, though, is our hydrogen production capabilities. So
yeah. I've always said, hydrogen and CO2 are on parallel paths, and they're both highly, very important these days. When you talk about Inflation Reduction Act, 80% of that is all about hydrogen or CO2, whether it's carbon capture or utilization. So you mentioned, I'm going to take you back really quick. You mentioned SMR. Tell us what SMR is.
Yeah, so there's two main ways to produce hydrogen today. One is called is an electrolytic process, and one is a steam methane reforming process. Steam methane reforming is what we do, and that technology has actually been around for a long time, maybe 100 years or so. It's very heavily used in the industrial world today, but those plants tended to be large, almost refinery-sized facilities. Billions of dollars in capex, huge land areas, things like that, and so transportation of that hydrogen it becomes challenging and is expensive. The other process is electrolytics, which is taking a huge amount of electricity and water and cracking that water molecule, and so that it needs a lot of water, but it also needs a lot of electricity to be able to produce that. And so a lot of advances being made in both forms, and both forms are necessary to actually get us to a hydrogen future. But the steam methane reforming process is really taking that methane molecule from natural gas or biogas, so-called renewable natural gas, and taking that methane molecule and breaking the hydrogen molecule off of it. And the byproduct of that process is CO2.
Yeah. So let's take it even a further step on hydrogen at a top level. Why do we care? What is so great about hydrogen? Is it we talk about energy transition? Is it the energy source of the future? And what's stopping that from happening?
It's certainly one of them. And for heavier use cases, industrial cases, heavy transportation, heavy equipment, those kinds of things, hydrogen provides a fuel source, an alternative fuel source to current fossil fuels like diesel, particularly, and things like that. Provides a one-to-one replacement. Currently, battery technology and things like that just are not efficient enough and powerful enough to allow for a one-to-one transition from a diesel truck to a battery electric truck. Those big Class 8 diesels that are hauling cargo all over the United States today, the reason they're so ubiquitous is there's an efficiency and a cost effectiveness to doing that. And trying to replace those today with batteries, it just doesn't work. You don't have the range, so you don't get the duty cycle, you don't get the number of miles out of a truck trip, you don't get the length of time out of a truck trip. But with hydrogen, you can.
Yeah.
So if you're going to replace a truck, I've got to replace my diesel truck today with 2 battery electric trucks, maybe 3, or with 1 single hydrogen fuel cell truck. I'm going to go replace it with a hydrogen fuel cell truck.
And why the push today? If the technology's been around for 100 years, is it really just the minimization of fossil fuels and the heightened focus that we're putting on that's driving these new forms or sources of energy? Are we coming down in economies of scale? Like, we hear about it a lot now. What's driving that?
Yeah, you've hit on 2 major things, right? There's a huge push, and it's a market push too, right? The regulations and legislation is trying to keep up. It's a market demand to clean up the supply chain, to clean up our environment, to clean up the atmosphere. People want to know what the carbon footprint is of the goods and products that they buy, and they want to reduce it. They want to have a lower impact than we've had in the past, and so everything that we've seen in the last couple of years, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, all those things that were passed during the pandemic, those are just in response to what the market is already demanding and already pushing for. And one of the key areas to clean up is our global supply chain. There's a significant, probably 20 to 30% of global emissions in our environment come from our supply chain, from ships and trucks and trains that are moving our global trade networks today. And so there's arguably some low-hanging fruit there. That's a lot of what's driving that and transit. There's a big move to meet some of these mandates through the cleaning up of our transit system, our buses and our rail transit system. And there's a huge opportunity there as well. And so those are kind of the 2 main driving factors. And so we're starting to see those demand pressures starting to compress the supply side, and that supply and demand, man, it's driving more demand, which means more production coming online, which is starting to drive down the cost.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to think of it as like that. We always say the all of the above solutions, because certainly there is a place for battery in some of those applications. There's a place for natural gas or compressed natural gas in some of those applications. Yes. But the bigger, the heavier, absolutely. Now you start getting into the hydrogen. But to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the real benefit ultimately of hydrogen is it burns clean. The harder part, the negative of it right now is to separate hydrogen from methane or hydrogen from water. It's very cost or power energy intensive to do that today. And that's where we have to get those economies of scale, because I like to look at it like every country in the world could be energy independent if we could rely on hydrogen as the power source.
That you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. We could be, and so it goes a long way, not just to cleaning up the atmosphere, cleaning up the environment, because hydrogen, like you said, hydrogen is hydrogen. Hydrogen burns clean, regardless of its original source of supply. The hydrogen molecule itself burns clean, and so using those applications, you've cleaned up those applications where you've substituted hydrogen for other fuels. But you're absolutely right too. There is an energy independence, and which is a national security issue that goes to a robust hydrogen production infrastructure. And so worrying about the carbon intensity of the hydrogen, less about the color of the hydrogen, is an important thing that we need to do in this country. The carbon intensity is key, and by using existing resources and networks, our existing pipeline system, our existing natural gas production system, and augmenting that with biogas from things like landfills and dairy farms and water treatment plants and things like that, and blending those molecules, that's methane that today just escapes into the atmosphere. Right. Blending those molecules into the natural gas system, we come up with an efficient SMR like Bayotech's unit. We come up with a carbon intensity scale around the hydrogen that's produced that is 0 and sometimes even negative, depending on how much RNG. So you can start to really, really have a positive impact on the current environment as well as the future environment by using some of those methods.
So how does that stack up against other forms of clean energy? I mean, neutral negative sounds like it is comparable to wind, solar, maybe more scalable, more cost intensive. Like where does this shake out in the big scheme of clean energy and carbon intensity specifically?
Exactly right. It is. I mean, if you can meet or beat the same sort of carbon intensity scale as wind or solar, you can start to drive. We can start to use RNG today, start to drive the uptake of hydrogen in these transit and logistics and ports and things like that. Start to drive the uptake of them and sort of start to get people over the hump of using hydrogen as a fuel while we build up this larger network of renewable energy, solar, wind, things like that, and the grid to be able to transmit that power efficiently and effectively to these other uses.
Yeah, we were just having a recent conversation about additionality and the blocking of hydrogen production because of it's not energy efficient in all colors. And I'm going to step back for a second. You talked about the colors of hydrogen, but so for the real simple basis, green hydrogen means it was hydrogen that was produced with only green energy, whether it's wind or solar, and zero CO2 emissions whatsoever of that. And then there's a whole rainbow of colors after that, down to if you burn coal and you use coal to produce the power that produces the hydrogen, that's like black or gray I don't see it in any other industry other than hydrogen, and it's really stopping or slowing the growth. And a lot of us just say, who cares what you just said? Ignore the colors for now. We will get there. And yes, ultimately we want to have all green hydrogen, but it's not rational to think we can have that today, and it's extremely expensive. I mean, it doesn't even exist, but it's also extremely expensive when we could be having this, blue or violet or whatever hydrogen we want to call it, and build up the infrastructure to ultimately get to the vision that you just laid out there. And that's stopping it. I mean, are you seeing a lot of that in impacting Bayotech's business at all, or the hindrance of growth in the market?
We haven't seen it stopping us or hindering us yet, but it is a constant. It's a constant refrain that we hear from certain corners of, well, it's not green. Well, it's not green. Well, it's not green. Well, that all you're doing when you're arguing that is you're letting the perfect get in the way of the good.
Yep.
Right. And the people who are really affected and impacted by industrial operations today, heavy industrial operations with a lot of diesel functionality going on in those operations, cannot wait for the perfect. They need to improve those locations right now. And the way to get there is through programs like SMR, using renewable natural gas and reducing the impact. Being able to reduce the impacts of that diesel on those communities that's what we got to be focused on right now.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge advocate of the renewable natural gas, RNG. You talk about biogas and things like that. We've done some episodes on some of those topics as well. For that reason, it's the methane is either going into the atmosphere or we're using it. It's landfill waste, it's wastewater waste, it's dairy and farm waste, food waste. So it's utilizing that for a good purpose, and we're recycling the entire environment to use that to create the hydrogen, to power the ships, to power the trucks, to power the boats. I mean, it's got to be the future. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, outlines or allocates a tremendous amount of funding for those projects, and some of this additionality is kind of starting to block that a little bit, right? Like they basically say, no, if it's not this, and this, you can't use it, and we've got to stop that and get everybody. That's why we do episodes like this because it's so important. It is carbon capture, it is carbon neutrality, green initiatives. But we're doing it proactively, by utilizing hydrogen and making it cost effective, which it's not today. I think we can all agree there isn't a cost effective hydrogen, diesel gas equivalent type of thing that's there. But we can get there. There is a path, but we need the runway to get there. So, what kind of obstacles are you seeing there? But I think we maybe kind of hit on that a lot. Where's the growth? I mean, we saw your recent announcement with the purchase of some Nikola trucks. I mean, that's outstanding. Another great company doing some great things in that trucking sector. Why don't you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean that's where we see a lot of growth. Again, is in the trucking sector, the heavy equipment sector, and the transit sector. We see a lot of opportunity there. Trucking is obvious. And any highway, any freeway in the United States, what do you see? You see big Class 8 diesel trucks going up and down the freeway. That is the lifeblood of our economy. So cleaning up that sector is going to have a huge impact, a huge benefit on our environment, and on the communities, and frankly on the drivers and the folks that operate that equipment all day long too. One thing that's not quite as visible but has a huge impact are the ports. And the ports, are huge locuses of diesel particulate emissions and things like that. They tend to be surrounded by communities of color that have equity challenges and are carry sort of an outsized burden of the impact of that diesel emission on their communities, on their areas. So cleaning those up is a huge opportunity. And then, of course, transit. Transit buses, transit, use in our urban areas. Big benefits there within those urban environments. Who uses transit? I think that's part of it, right? It's communities that are that need support and need to be shouldn't bear the burden of the impacts. And so transit is another huge area, and OEMs are really focused on those areas as well, right? There's a lot of hydrogen fuel cell buses now being produced for transit. People are starting to produce hydrogen fuel cell trains for commuter trains and things like that. There's a lot of activity in the port sector, the heavy equipment, cargo handling sector. The top picks and the yard hustlers and things in a port environment, a warehouse environment. Forklifts, lift trucks, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the big Class 8 diesels. So that's where we see growth. There's an economic model that works in those sectors. And so we think that's where we're going to start to see a lot of this additional uptake of hydrogen in the short to mid term. Is in those sectors, in those markets, and it's going to help drive down the cost of hydrogen overall for the rest of the economy.
Yeah, so real quick, talk about the engines that are associated with this, because we did a lot of this back in 2012 to 2016 with natural gas, and back then it was called the HHP, the high horsepower unit. So you had mine trucks, rail, marine, and power generation was all in there for the same thing. But even on the transportation sector, those Class 8 trucks that you're talking about, the 15-liter engine never really, like Cummins and the others, never really could get an efficient, high torque engine that was effective enough to compete with diesel and perform that it needed to. I get the sense we don't have that same problem when it comes to electric or the fuel cells from hydrogen. So is that easily overcome in those regards?
Yeah, that's right. And the reason being is that the motors that are driving the wheels that are providing the torque are actually electric motors. Whether it's a battery electric truck or a hydrogen fuel cell truck, the motor that's driving the wheels is actually an electric motor. So you get the torque and you get the power that you need to be able to move that heavy cargo. The fuel cell is just a generator. It's just generating an electrical current, right? Whether it's fueled with that just happens to be fueled by hydrogen. Same thing with a battery, right? It's just providing an electrical current to that electric motor. So that's what you're seeing in trucks, and I think that's the difference today between a hydrogen powered truck, a hydrogen fuel cell truck, and the some of the past efforts in this regard. Sort of see the same thing with rail, right? Because if you think about it, a diesel locomotive is really a diesel electric locomotive, right? It's a diesel generator on board the locomotive that's turning an electric motor to drive the steel wheels. Replacing that with a fuel cell gets you the same thing. It gets you the same amount of power, same amount of torque, because you're driving that electric motor. And so what you're really doing is you're replacing the diesel generator on board the locomotive with a hydrogen fuel cell.
That was kind of eye-opening for me when I first kind of got that realization that it's not that the fuel cell, the hydrogen fuel cell, it's not a hydrogen car. It's an electric car fueled, but instead of plugging it in and generating your power, that fuel cell generates the power on board, and then you just have to reload the hydrogen, which is hydrogen is the most abundant molecule in the universe, so we have plenty of it. It's just a matter of getting it cost effective to separate it into a usable source.
That's right. It's just a matter of making it available. It's there. It's in everything, right? But we just got to make it available.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, just thinking about its availability and trying to get the push and commercialize hydrogen. I'm vaguely familiar with 45Z, which is the credit within the IRA for hydrogen. I understand 45Q, we talk about it a lot. With SMR, sounds like there's opportunity to take a look at both of those credits because you are producing CO2 and quite a bit of CO2 that can be captured. Also, you have the opportunity to capitalize on 45Z. Can you touch on the credits a little bit? What makes sense for the hydrogen industry? Does sequestration, you probably can't stack, but I would love to understand how we do bring more to market here and leverage some of these incentives.
Yeah, I don't, and you're right. I don't know that we can stack. What we're focused on is the 45V credit for production, hydrogen production using renewable natural gas. Right, that's where we get the most bang for the buck. And what we're excited about is the opportunity to work with a company, like that can capture the CO2 that's coming out of our production stack and capture that and use that commercially, either whether it be sequestration or clean it up and use it for industrial uses or even food grade uses, food uses, right? It becomes an almost free source of CO2. Other than the cost of capital and the incremental O&M, becomes an almost free source of CO2 for those purposes.
Relatively clean source of CO2 at that.
And it's a relatively clean source, right? It's not a dense source, but it's a relatively clean source. And so it depends on what the constituency is of the feedstock going in, right? The natural gas going in, and we're taking pipeline quality gas in. And we're making, in the SMR process, we're making a fuel cell grade hydrogen. So the inherent process takes whatever constituents might be in the gas and breaks those down to a large degree. So a lot of the CO2 that does end up coming out the stack and is available for capture and reuse is fairly clean CO2 coming in.
Yeah, and that's why I say, like I said earlier, I mean, they're on parallel paths. I mean, where you have hydrogen production, you have CO2. But so, like we always say on this show here, is like, let's find alternative uses and good uses for that CO2. That's sustainable aviation fuel, things like that. And the real ultimate gain in this, I mean, there's it sounds great on the campaign trail to say, we're going to be off fossil fuels by 2030 or 2035. That is asinine, in my opinion. I mean, the odds of getting off fossil fuels in the next 100 years is probably pretty limited, but we can absolutely minimize it and start reducing it. And so if we have these biogas sources and RNG, you don't have to pull natural gas out to burn the natural gas and get the methane, things like that. Same with the CO2. We don't need to find new sources of CO2. We have plenty of sources of CO2 that can be used for all these things. So, and that's where you get a little angry about the additionality blockage, because it's so short-sighted. We can't just say wind and solar are going to save the world and we need battery electric cars. Well, those battery electric cars aren't any greener than anything else we have today either. It just sounds good. It's green at the source because they're not creating emissions, but everything that went into it to generate that power and everything else downstream or upstream of it isn't green. And so, we have to go with the all of the above mentality. So let's say,
It does have to be an all of the above. And look, there's not anything, and I know this is controversial to say, but I don't see anything inherently wrong with fossil fuels per se. It's how we use the fossil fuels that needs to be changed and improved, right? So if we can use natural gas supplies and rather than just burning them, we can refine them into products that can be used in a clean, safe, sustainable manner, then why not?
You can say the same thing.
Again, I don't think it's a silver bullet, but it is part of the solution.
Yep. No, that's great. Well, that's why I think it's so important what Bayotech is doing. Because like you said earlier with the historic SMR, it's very large scale, and certainly when we have pipelines and things like that, makes large scale very more feasible, I guess you'd say. But at the same time, I mean, you have a smaller scale system. You can get point of use almost for hydrogen. And, that we need that as a bridge for the next 10, 20 years while we get larger scale hydrogen production and pipelines. But even after that, you're always going to have a need for point of use production. And so if we can get that cost effective, now you can, transition all sorts of different things from generating, electric to now fuel cell production. So.
I mean, I think in the short run, what it does is, like I say, it starts to provide that gateway into the transition to hydrogen as a fuel. Right. In the long run, it becomes sort of like the infill, right? It becomes the filling the niche, filling the gaps in the supply chain as the larger scale environment works out. And I sort of liken it to, you've got big utility scale solar plants that are being built, right? But I got solar panels on my roof.
Right. Yep.
Right. Point of view. So there, it's that all of the above sort of approach and mentality. There's not one or the other. It's not black or white. It's how do we build out a network, a system that functions and works and gets us where we want to be.
I totally agree. Yeah. Well, hey, this is extremely educational, extremely helpful. Like I said, was really highly encouraged by what you guys are doing there. I think you got some great products. What didn't we ask? What didn't we cover today?
The only thing I can think of, and I'll give a little plug for us. And you touched on it earlier, right? It's this Bayotech technology and hub and the ability to put it at the user. We can produce a couple of tons a day of hydrogen on a couple of acres of ground. And so, rather than $1 billion and 40 acres and cryogenic plants and things like that, we can produce gaseous hydrogen right there at the use. So, I mean, theoretically, we could do it, next to a transit agency bus yard. We could do it on a terminal at a port. We could do it in an industrial park where there's warehouses that are using hydrogen fuel cell forklifts. We could build one next to a truck stop on a freeway somewhere. Things like that we can do to start to really build out the network and the system to make hydrogen available for widespread use. And I think that's a really cool thing, and something that we're really excited about. So.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, that's I totally agree. It's critical for the adoption and the growth. And can you do that for power generation too? So can you generate power off of that hydrogen production on like co-locate power production on site for operation?
We could co-locate it and pump it into so let's say where you had a combustion turbine plant, you could co-locate one of our hubs at that location. The same natural gas that's feeding the combustion turbines could feed our SMR, convert it to hydrogen, and then put that into the combustion turbines.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey,
I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners will as well. And for us, Catching Carbon, this will be the first of a few episodes where we do start to better understand hydrogen, and we want our audience to do the same. So Jack, thank you for coming on, PhD, educating us. We certainly appreciate it. Everybody be sure to check out Bayotech. They're doing some exciting stuff in the clean energy space. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.